Beneath the frozen waters of Russia's remote coastlines, a silent graveyard stretches for miles. Forgotten steel giants, once symbols of Soviet naval power, now left to rot. Their corroding hulls whisper a story of ambition, collapse, and abandonment. These submarines were once the pride of a superpower, patrolling the depths with lethal precision, but when the Soviet Union fell, so did its ability to maintain its vast fleet. Now these rusting relics sit motionless, frozen in time, a chilling reminder of a Cold War arsenal left to decay. What happened to these mighty vessels, and why were they left to die? During the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Union's naval doctrine revolved around one undeniable truth: control the depths, and you control the war. Unlike the United States, which balanced its naval power between aircraft carriers and submarines, the Soviet Navy placed overwhelming emphasis on its undersea fleet. Submarines became the backbone of Soviet military strategy, a silent force capable of striking deep into enemy waters, evading detection, and, if necessary, delivering devastating nuclear retaliation. From the Arctic to the Pacific, these vessels prowled the oceans, their very presence a constant reminder that the Cold War was not just waged on land or in the skies. It was fought beneath the waves. The Soviet submarine program was not just ambitious, it was relentless. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the USSR churned out diesel-electric submarines at a pace the world had never seen. The Project 641 Foxtrot-class, a direct descendant of the German Type 21 U-boats, formed the backbone of the early fleet. These boats were formidable for their time, with long patrol endurance and a deadly array of torpedoes. But diesel-electric technology had its limits. The real revolution came with nuclear propulsion. In the late 1950s, the Soviet Union introduced its first nuclear-powered submarine, the Project 627 November-class, designed to rival the U.S. Navy's Nautilus. This marked the beginning of a new era, one in which Soviet submarines could stay submerged for months, stalking enemy fleets without the need to surface. As the Cold War escalated, so did the ambitions of Soviet naval engineers. By the 1970s and 80s, the USSR had developed some of the most advanced submarines in the world. The Alfa-class, Project 705, was a technological marvel. Built with a titanium hull and powered by a liquid metal-cooled reactor, it was the fastest attack submarine ever created, capable of reaching speeds of over 40 knots. This extreme speed allowed it to outrun torpedoes, making it nearly impossible to catch. Then there was the Akula-class, a stealthy predator designed to match and surpass America's Los Angeles-class attack subs. Its improved sonar, quiet propulsion, and lethal torpedo capabilities made it one of the most feared submarines of its time. But no submarine embodied Soviet naval dominance quite like the Typhoon-class, Project 941, the largest submarines ever built. These behemoths were unlike anything the world had seen before. Armed with 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles, each capable of carrying multiple nuclear warheads, a single Typhoon-class submarine had the power to erase entire cities from existence. More than just weapons of war, they were symbols of Soviet engineering might, massive, intimidating, and nearly indestructible under Arctic ice. Their sheer size allowed for unmatched crew comfort, including onboard swimming pools, unheard of in Western submarines. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union's submarine fleet was at its peak. Hundreds of vessels spread across the Arctic, Atlantic, and Pacific, with one goal in mind: to ensure that in the event of war, the USSR would have the ultimate second strike capability. These submarines were not just military assets, they were chess pieces in a global game of nuclear brinkmanship. Silent, Deadly and omnipresent, they formed an invisible wall beneath the oceans, ensuring that even if the Soviet homeland were attacked, retaliation would be swift and absolute. Yet, for all their technological advancements and strategic significance, these submarines were not invincible, not to time, and certainly not to economic collapse. As the Soviet Union crumbled, so too did its ability to maintain this vast, expensive fleet. What once patrolled the world's oceans with silent menace would soon find itself abandoned, rusting away in forgotten shipyards and frozen waters. The era of Soviet submarine dominance had reached its peak, but its decline was already beginning. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, it wasn't just a political empire that crumbled, it was an entire military machine. Nowhere was this more evident than in the Navy. Once boasting one of the largest submarine fleets in the world, the newly formed Russian Federation found itself in possession of hundreds of vessels it could no longer afford to maintain. Funding vanished overnight, shipyards fell silent, crews abandoned their posts, the once proud underwater armada was left adrift, rusting, forgotten, and slowly dying in frozen harbors. Throughout the 1990s, images began to surface from naval bases across Russia. Rows of decomposing submarines, some partially submerged, others leaning lifelessly against each other, their hulls corroded by time and neglect. The worst of it could be seen in the Arctic, where nuclear-powered submarines sat abandoned in places like Olenya Bay, Severodvinsk, and the Kamchatka Peninsula. Without proper dismantling procedures, these hulking machines became environmental hazards, floating time bombs filled with radioactive material, leaking fuel, and exposed nuclear reactors. Some were left in dry docks, stripped for parts, while others were simply scuttled in shallow waters. One of the most haunting images of this decline could be found in Vladivostok's submarine graveyard, where decommissioned Foxtrot-class and Tango-class diesel-electric submarines lay in twisted heaps, barely rising above the surface. These weren't just relics of the past, they were evidence of a superpower's rapid and brutal decline. In some cases, submarines were simply abandoned at sea, left to drift as ghost ships with no crew, no power, and no future. For Russia's new government, there were bigger concerns: an economic freefall, unpaid wages for military personnel, and a struggle to maintain even basic naval operations. Scrapping these submarines required money, resources, and international cooperation, none of which were in abundance. By the early 2000s, with Western assistance, some of the most dangerous nuclear submarines were finally dismantled, their cores removed, their steel sold for scrap. But even today, remnants of this forgotten fleet remain, rusting in remote harbors, slowly being consumed by time, a haunting reminder of an empire that once ruled the depths. Scattered across Russia's remote coastlines, hidden in icy inlets and forgotten naval bases, lie the rusting remnants of a once feared fleet. The haunting images of Soviet submarine graveyards tell a silent story of power, collapse, and abandonment. In these decayed harbors, massive steel giants rest motionless, their hulls corroded by decades of neglect, their conning towers barely rising above the waterline. Some sit half-submerged, leaning at unnatural angles, while others are locked in frozen seas, trapped in layers of ice that shift with the seasons. The sight is surreal. Machines designed for stealth and destruction, now left defenseless against time itself. One of the most chilling locations is Vladivostok's submarine graveyard, a resting place for decommissioned diesel-electric submarines. Here, old Foxtrot-class and Tango-class boats, once the backbone of Soviet naval patrols, are barely recognizable beneath layers of rust. The most common are the Foxtrot-class, Project 641, diesel-electric submarines, a workhorse of the Soviet fleet during the Cold War. Their sleek hulls, once cutting through the depths on covert missions, now sit partially submerged, corroded by decades of exposure. The Tango-class, Project 641B, a more advanced version with improved stealth and firepower, also lies among the wreckage, its once formidable torpedo tubes now silent. In places like Olenia Bay and Severodvinsk, the skeletal remains of November-class, Project 627, nuclear attack submarines can still be seen, their once revolutionary reactors long since removed. Perhaps the most haunting of all are the Echo-class, Project 659, and Victor-class, Project 671 submarines, both designed for nuclear warfare. The Echo-class, an early Soviet attempt at nuclear-armed cruise missile submarines, now sits in ghostly disrepair, its launch tubes long since emptied. The Victor-class, a more modern attack submarine designed to hunt enemy vessels, is also present in some graveyards. Its once advanced sonar arrays and powerful torpedoes, now rendered useless by time. Some have collapsed under their own weight, their steel exteriors crumbling like ancient ruins. Others remain eerily intact, their torpedo tubes still visible, as if waiting for orders that will never come. In winter, ice grips the hulls like a vice, locking them in a state of frozen decay. Among these forgotten relics are two of the most infamous Soviet submarines, K-27 and K-159, both carrying a legacy of disaster, radiation, and secrecy. These vessels were not simply abandoned, they were left as silent warnings of a military ambition that outpaced its own ability to control the consequences. The submarine was deemed too dangerous to salvage, and in 1981 it was deliberately scuttled in the Kara Sea, sunk in shallow waters off the coast of Novaya Zemlya. To this day it rests at the bottom, its radioactive core still intact, a ticking environmental time bomb that the world has largely forgotten. The Soviet submarine fleet was once a symbol of military might, a force designed to challenge the dominance of the West beneath the waves. But today its remnants tell a different story, one of neglect, decay, and the inevitable passage of time. The rusting hulks, scattered across Arctic waters, and abandoned naval bases serve as eerie monuments to a superpower that no longer exists. Once feared and respected, these submarines now sit forgotten, their steel skeletons crumbling under the weight of history. Yet their legacy lingers. Some, like K-27 and K-159, pose ongoing environmental threats, their nuclear cores still waiting for a resolution that may never come. Others have already been scrapped, their metal repurposed, their existence reduced to little more than grainy Cold War photographs. The few that remain above water continue to rust away, frozen in time, their silent hulls whispering stories of classified missions, near catastrophes, and a navy that once ruled the depths. As years pass, these relics of the past will eventually disappear, either reclaimed by the sea or dismantled for safety. But their fading legacy is a stark reminder of how power, no matter how great, is never permanent. The submarines that once patrolled the world's oceans in secrecy are now exposed, their final resting places serving as cautionary tales of military ambition, technological risk, and the ultimate price of collapse.